All right, and welcome, folks. It's been a while since we've made a new episode, so we thought we would get to a pretty good one. I had been waiting for a while to go through this collection. There's a lot of great things there, and shout out to the institution. We'll go through that here in a second. But if it's your first time at the channel, you're not a subscriber, and you like Chinese antiques, you like antiques in general, you like discussions about antiques, make sure to hit that subscribe button. It certainly helps us out, keeps us going. If you have a favorite piece or something, we'd love to hear from you. This should be a little different than our normal videos where we go through eBay sold results and look at what's selling on the market right now. Today, we're actually going to take a look at some of the wonderful items in the public domain portion of the Chicago Art Institute, or the Art Institute of Chicago. Really, they have a fantastic collection. And a lot of it's online. If you want to pull up these pictures on your own, you can certainly do that and take a really good in-depth look at them. So we're going to start off today with a really famous scene from the Hong Harbor that if you are around and about in Chinese antiques, I would wager you've seen this. I'd wager you've seen it faked as well. But this is really, one of those constant images that you might see. I know there's a wonderful color version of this, wonderful polychrome version of this bowl that has sold for a lot of money. And so that's always interesting to see those auction results. But I do rather love this bowl pattern. I don't know if you call it a pattern specifically, but some great things about it. The scene itself is so intricate, and it's just really fun to look at. It's very much in the era of opening up China to more trade, and we have the different European powers with their specific factories and the exports that they would work with there. And really like that we can zoom in all the way here, and you can see just how intricate the work was painted on here. Of course, all of this is hand painted. We get this really nice Greek key base. Really nice sort of black and yellow, or black and gold, really stylization for this. Quite a nice piece, and if you just go through, you see how intricate. Here we get the figure of the European, which is kind of fun. We get the European dress of the time, which is a little flamboyant by modern standards. And of course, we have some Chinese men who are either working or trading. We have a couple more Europeans over here, which is just very excellent. And of course, we have some small boats in the foreground. This is quite the punch bowl, and I mean, if you were serving out of this at a party, you'd probably be quite someone. Nowadays, we're not using these anymore, or at least I hope not. I know that there's been plenty of stories of people who use these types of bowls to throw their keys into, so please don't do that if you have one. And really kind of exceptional here is this border work on top. I really like this sort of geometric circle pattern. It's a little bit different. And unfortunately, we only get one image of these items, so we can't take a look at the base. I've already got in mind what this foot rim should look like. Probably be a little bit thinner, and then it would go in a little bit and be kind of a deep foot rim. But a very nice piece. Let's look at the details here. They say 1789. That sounds just about right. Really, the thing that we're looking for is purchased with the funds by the Antiquarian Society. So it's not a specific gift. We can't really trace it back, which is sometimes cool to know with these types of items. But a very, very lovely bowl, and just a wonderful scene from the Chinese antiques. So we move on, something very common and very interesting. We have the tureen, the three tureens really, the main large tureen and then these two smaller tureens. These probably serve soup or a stew in the large one, and then maybe some sides. Or I am actually not an expert at how these were used in their on the dinner table. And certainly terrines are kind of beyond me. I know that the large one would be used for soup. I'm not sure what the smaller ones were used for, but I certainly know a little bit more about them. Let's see, we've got service owned by Elias Morgan of Connecticut, displaying coat of arms by Welsh ancestors. That makes sense because this does not look English per se, but if we get in closer, we'll probably see uh, some of the more oh, it doesn't look English. There's a big lion on it that I couldn't see. But so we've got a little bit more stylization that to me looks like off English or off European. So Welsh makes sense. We've got the winged deer on top and the lion, and even kind of cool. Let's see if I can zoom in any more. No, I can't really. Is we've got, it looks like Morgan is written on there. And then we have the branches to each side, a very cool crest. Gosh, I feel very silly now saying that it's not, it doesn't look very English, just a dang lion on it. But some cool things about this terrain that make it a little bit different is actually this, at first look, I was wondering if this was like a snail, but it appears that might be more like a acorn or even a berry of sorts. Very kind of cool painted. It doesn't look like a mollusk or something. I don't know. Sometimes the finials can be very difficult to discern what they are. We do have a lot of wear on this piece, but we tend to forgive pieces of this age with a lot of wear. I mean, this is a good 18th century piece that we're looking at. So the fact that it has so much wear is not really that big of an issue. I mean, this was probably used quite frequently in a rough and tumble American household at the turn of the 19th century. And something else that's kind of cool about this is that we not only do we have all three, but we know the very specific provenance. We know where this came from. It's marked the family name on there as well. So very cool. This is a piece that would have been specialty ordered back in the day. The merchants doing business out of China might have been some of the original catalog merchants, so it would have put a way for this design to be added onto the terrain, and you'd have to wait. You would have had to wait longer than you do to wait today to get furniture during quarantine times, but it might have all been worth it to get a nice, lovely set of Chinese porcelain. And I imagine there would be a much larger service that went with this. Usually when you're getting this sort of custom work, you would have ordered just a massive set of porcelain. So very, very cool to see that here. And next we get something a little more typical, but kind of cool. Let's see here. We have, yes, I assume this was for the American market. And we have, yep, late Qianlong. And really nice piece, frankly. You get sort of a similar finial that looks like sort of a golden acorn. But the thing that I really liked about this, and that really sets it apart, the figures on here are very cool. And this is where, we zoom in a little bit more and it gets very visibly American, very visibly federal, as opposed to the Connecticut piece, which was still a little bit more European stylization, with the Welsh family crest, etc. This is very much American. We have the Scales of Justice figure on the right, which is really cool. We get these sort of federal shields down here, and the dove, which is a very common on pieces of American export porcelain, moving away from some of the British motifs. Also very common on American export porcelain is this sort of color stylization. The blue and gold borders were very frequently favored by Americans at the time. So you'll see that. If you see that pronounced on a piece of export porcelain, it's probably one way to tell it was from the American market. We've got some much more obvious clues here with the with the blind justice, as well as the federal shields, which just very much give it away, as well as the dove. A nice piece this is. And something else that's cool here, you have the double worked handle, which wraps inside. Just a little extra flair for this piece to set it apart. Very, very cool. Let's see, when was this added to the collection? As bequest of Frederick S. Colburn, so we don't get much more about it. But a lovely, lovely teapot from the export porcelain era, where we were doing a lot of armorial ware. Now here's another American market piece, and some interesting things here. Let's see. So it's even a political piece. And this is something that's really cool about the collection out of Chicago, is that they have so many good pieces for the American market. I know I've looked at a couple pieces from other museums, and this is really, as far as like online collections go, this is a really top-notch one to look through. We have here, again, a Colburn edition, so coming out of the same lot as some of the other 18th century porcelain. So some things that set this one apart. It is a bit earlier, and one of the ways we can really confirm that is we have this black and red stylized border with a sort of almost like the starburst patterns. I'm not sure what this is called, but that to me says very much, it's not necessarily, it's just at the just before the third, or just at the end of the third quarter of the 18th century is when that seemed to be really popular, and just very wonderful. You can see how well done. I mean, of course, if you're a fantastic artist, you might think that this is a little crude, but I would I would dare you to try to paint with a very fine brush onto porcelain that is not a flat surface and see if it comes out so well. Wonderful, wonderful artistry here, and kind of interesting to see the way in which the European figures are drawn. It's interesting, actually. Do we make a note? Was this decorated in Europe, or it doesn't make a stance on where it was decorated. I tend to think this was decorated in China. The flowers over here certainly seem like it. We're just very similar as how other things would have been done at the days. The thing that gives me interest is you don't see a lot of Western figures drawn in such prominence. So some of the approach to how they're depicted feels a little bit different than how the Chinese would have depicted themselves in a similar era. That makes me wonder, but I do ultimately think that this was decorated in Asia. And very cool to get the Arms of Liberty written across. What a great piece. These are the kinds of, something that's cool about going to the collections like this is these are things that you would likely never see come up for sale unless you're perusing just the highest quality auction houses, or if you're extremely lucky, quite a wonderful piece, really. And it's too bad we can't see the foot rim again, but I can assume maybe we'll get to see one later. But this is a very, very common looking foot rim style for the period. Like I said, it's going to be deeper and thinner, and just overall a very nice 18th century piece. Here we move on to another Qianlong era wine cup. So this a little bit earlier, which makes sense. We've got some, let's see, from the Winfield Foundation. I wish they would add dates of when things were added, but that's all right. So some things that are cool here. We're very much sticking with the red, black, gold color pattern that I was saying is a little bit popular earlier in the 18th century. We have some nudity here on this one, so I won't spend too much time on that. So just to actually, we'll go ahead and skip along just to keep the old YouTube happy. And we have here the tankard from the middle of the 18th century. I thought this was absolutely smashing. We've attributed it directly to Jing Dezhen, which is cool to know. So some things about this one, we have a very lovely European scene here that has been done in the Chinese style. So kind of interesting. And I wonder, well, it looks like we have someone who's sick and then potentially a priest or another member of the house, and then all of the ladies who are enjoying, or not enjoying, but the ladies who are dealing with this sickness. And hopefully this person doesn't look too sick. It looks like maybe they've gotten better, and this might explain why we see these figures aren't looking as sad as they might otherwise. So a couple of things to note here: a really good use of lines to create the background. We sort of get these colored in portions as a way of filling in some texture into the scene. And also cool to note is when I was saying earlier, done in the Chinese style, we do get this, you can see here clearly sort of the Chinese perspective style applied to this table that is over here in the corner. And a very interesting imagining of what Europe might look like. I would think this was also decorated in Asia, but of course I could be wrong about that. And so we have, yes, we're starting to move on a little bit, made for the Western market. I would think this was made, this is either American market or Europe, but something is telling me that this is actually for the French market, or even though it's got the American colors, something about this just strikes me as being for Europe. And you can see that the museum has not wagered a guess beyond to say that it was shipped to the West, which I think is absolutely correct. So we have a central medallion, and then this is actually I think this is a little more of a bowl than this lets on. This rim would drop down into the bowl, and then we've got just so much fine work to paint these edges in this piece. Really kind of spectacular overall. And again, it's a pity we can't see the backside, because that would be nice to see. I'm not sure if these are olive trees. If they are, that could help to explain where this might be from. I think there's a lot of folks who would find this rather stylish, especially as we start to move away from the, constant pronouncement of our heraldic origins, and start to look into a little bit more deco style that will characterize the 19th century. And it's interesting to see here how the export porcelain, the armorial style, ultimately gives way to a more decorative stylization that people tend to associate with the 19th century, and less with the 18th century. Though some of it's there, and we'll see a little bit of that here in a couple items. Let's see, where was this from? Gift of Mrs. Frank Constant in the Illinois chapter at American Institute of Decorators in memory of William Constant. Well, excellent, excellent. So, really a nice bowl or plate. Is listed as a plate, so maybe this is just a plate and this isn't as deep as I initially thought. So here we have a soup bowl. We're just talking about the transition to the 19th century, and here we have a very early 18th century piece that, Alex, was this made for Spain? It's not marked. Something about this tells me it was for the Spanish market, probably the colors here, but somebody will tell me that, hey, you're foolish, this is an English crest right here. I'm not sure what these are. Actually, somebody could tell me probably very quickly what this crest is, and I am just not really an expert on heraldic porcelain, nor am I expert in the early to mid 18th century of porcelain. It's really not my area of focus. It's not stuff that's around to be bought here a lot. So I'm very much an appreciator of the subject, but I'm much more focused on Qing and Republic era porcelain, just because that's what I'm able to buy quite frequently. But let's look at some of the nice things here. You know, you can see the precursor to the styles of the other mid-century, mid-18th century pieces we were looking at. We very much got sort of red and gold here. The black is yet to really become very pronounced, which would be a stylistic change. It's kind of interesting. We've got this arm holding the dragon or the serpent, which I think again uh, makes me think of the uh, makes me think of Spain. I really do think this is Spanish. I don't know. Somebody will tell me in the comments, you know, what this crest is, you know, what power this belonged to. And it might even be like a very small, might be a smaller kingdom from the era, because we are at, this is early 18th century, so the world looked a little bit different then. So some things to note here that's kind of interesting are these items that, or the sort of decorative items that fall a bit out of fashion in armorial porcelain. We've got here, you know, some wheatgrass, we've got some floral decoration. This looks like it might be a pumpkin or a squash. Um, and these little sort of extra items, like I was saying, kind of fall out of favor. You know, with the other porcelain we see that's more squarely into the 18th century, it was quite a bit more minimal, or just more focused on the armorial or heraldic patterns. And the export porcelain of the 18th century ultimately loses some of these additional figures, and it tends to lose these little medallions as well, not as popular. We end up with just a much more blank white porcelain with the desired crest on it. And I won't speculate as to why that happens. I know there's a lot of specific reasons, but very interesting to note the changes over time. And here it's kind of cool if you look in close. Let's see, can we get in closer? Yeah, we can. You can see the sort of precursor to the very common starburst rim pattern that might just be a floral pattern that has devolved a little bit going around this bowl. So a lot of elements here that you can see how they change through time and become more or less pronounced. There's almost no black on here. There's just a little bit here and some here. But ultimately, you know, if you flash forward 30 or 40 years, black would really come to dominate this red and gold scheme. And then if you go forward another 30 years, it's the sort of red, gold, and black is almost fallen out of fashion, other than, you know, very strongly pronounced polychrome items. But a very, very nice piece. So we're starting to change here. This is Daogong, so early 19th century. And it's interesting, you know, we're talking about sort of the minimalist approach that was very typical of armorial porcelain that gives way to the very strong medallion style that we tend to associate with the 19th century. And this is a great piece with the goat on here, and we get a little budding tree, very well painted as well. I love these little knots in the tree. We've got a yellow ground enamel, which is very popular. I think this would do quite well if it were to go to market. And you can see in here just the really wonderful evidence of handwork. And also, wow, now that we've zoomed in, we can see sort of the patterned work that's been done on this yellow ground porcelain, which is just fantastic. Wow, that is really something to see up close. I did not even notice that when I had selected this piece. Also worth noting is that we have the blue, sort of the blue painted inside that was then fired. It would really make this kind of a smashing piece, even though to a lot of modern collectors, I think that there's a little bit of a clash between the yellow ground outside and the sort of blue and white approach to the inside. And that's not to say people wouldn't find this very desirable. I think this would be found extremely desirable should it or were to hit the market today. But I think ultimately this is certainly early, because I think we tend to split in the directions where Polychromes are polychromes and blue and whites are blue and whites, and we tend to separate them out a little bit more. So a wonderful piece, gift of Miss Chauncey Borland. So again, we don't have a date, but the museum is confident in placing it to the Daogong period, and that sounds about right to me. So let's take a look here next. Yes, all right. So I think probably similar. Probably similar, but they confidently announce this as Kangxi, so we will go with that. And kind of nice to see Shu Lao, the god of longevity, pictured in a less extreme manner. I think most of us who are around these days are very familiar with just the constant bombardment of fake Shu Lao figures that really pronounce uh, the forehead, and it's kind of refreshing to see a less pronounced version. And now that they get in closer, you certainly see marks of the great era, some of the great eras of Chinese porcelain here, especially if we look at the way that the figures are painted and the faces. Certainly could be 100% what they say it is. Really nice bat figures around the edges, and without seeing the backside, I won't have too much more to say about this. Really nice use of colors, and the color palette does look about right for the era. So very cool. How nice would it be to have this burl wood table? That must have taken a lot of work to carve that. Overall, a very lovely piece with a nice scene and a couple of different very cool things here. Nice to get the scepter and a really well painted deer as well. Look at him. How cute is that? So, say is again, we don't have a date of when it was acquired, but another gift to the museum. A lot of really nice things have been given to the Art Institute of Chicago, which doesn't surprise me because there's a lot of good money in Chicago in the mid to late 19th century, which would have flowed in a lot of these items to the area, and then they were probably gifted. I guess a lot of these were probably gifted in the mid 20th century as the estates, great estates of the 19th century were, slowly deassembling. And here we have, yes, a squarely Qianlong, really nice vase that to me, this is one of the pieces that tells us, what the next 100, 200 years of style are going to look like. And if you were to find something like this today, these are selling like hotcakes. They're really top-notch performers in the auction houses. We've got a great colorful bat at the top, what the now classic Famille Rose patterning on this. We've got the sort of top border. We've got a gold gilded edge. We've got a nice little handles on the top here, and just really wonderful work to paint the sort of floral scenes throughout this whole piece. And then we go all the way down to the bottom, and again, you're starting to see some of these really common motifs that get expressed over and over again, and ultimately the little Greek key border. What a great shape this is too. You can really tell sometimes the golden age of some of the golden ages of porcelain just by how fantastically attractive the shapes that were made are. And do we place this to Jing Dezhen? We do not. But it's a bequest of Henry Schwab, so very cool, very cool. Really a nice piece. And here we go. It's kind of cool. I actually picked this one out because this is a pattern that sees some resurgence, and I think it's seen some resurgence lately. We've got Yongzheng, rank, rainmark, and period, so we've attributed this actually to the early 18th century. So another piece to me that kind of stands out a little bit from the armorial ware that was so common in the 18th century. And the peach blossom pattern is something that transcends reigns. It's going to keep getting produced. Actually, if I turn my head to the left, I can see I have uh, a nice, quote nice, a nice copy of a peach blossom vase that was made in Hong Kong in the middle of the 20th century. We can't all have these lovely 18th century peach blossom pieces, but if you zoom in, you'll notice just the absolute wonderful work that's been done on the leaves and the branches to get just this great coloration that you can see throughout the entire piece. Really well done, really thoughtfully put together here. We've gone so far as to give a little bit of blemishes to the peaches, so very attempting to be realistic, holding these natural forms of the leaves. Yeah, this is really well painted. Very, very nice. And we have, of course, kind of a nice little addition up here to get the good luck bats. This one very cute, just with its little whiskers up in the air. This is quite the piece. This is very, very well painted. I am kind of blown away by this one looking at it up close. Wow. Very, very nice. I'd be a little worried about this branch holding up this peach. But other than that, just absolutely fantastic. Really, really nice. And I would love to see the other side of this one. Unfortunately, they don't have that imaged. And here, another piece that I believe we say, yes, early to mid 18th century, or midish to late 18th century. So again, we're talking about the changes in style, with the decoration. And you see it here on more than just the armorial porcelain, but there was this sort of trend towards the white background and to just bring out and really showcase the excellent painting that was being done by artisans at the time. Again, we've got another scene with Shu Lao, looking a bit more pronounced here. We have the other Taoist immortals figured in the piece, and we have looks like a child leading a deer with some items on its back. We've got the wonderful crane over here, kind of well painted with this really great shaped neck and the red tip. So this is a really nice piece as well. It's nice to see. It's nice to see these high quality 18th century pieces because it gives you a good idea of the way in which the figures were painted at the time, which is one of the best ways to tell if something is authentic 18th century, especially if it has figures on it. People who are experts of Chinese porcelain ultimately can get to the point where looking at the way in which the figures were painting really gives a good clue of when something is from. And here we get a little bit of actually getting to see the base, so you can kind of see what I was saying earlier with a sort of thinner foot rim that is much more pronounced and it goes down a little bit. We have a deeper sitting base, and here it looks like we've got a double circle 6-character mark, which seems about right for what this is supposed to be. Again, the museum has designated it as mark and period for Qianlong. So probably looking at about 1760 to 1780 in my mind, but perhaps a little bit earlier. So we've got starting to peek ahead. I would place this at probably closer to the end of the 18th century. I'm sure someone in the comments will disagree with me, but let's take a look at this flower basket dish. So very cool. I think this does really start to foreshadow the trend towards Famille Rose as just a complete scheme of decoration. Very interestingly done here with this sort of almost lattice pattern, this geometric pattern to create a sort of open metalwork vase on top of a either a bowl or a plate. Very well painted. Some really good work has gone into the different flowers we see here, um, and just great use of uh, great use of different flowers to give this a really colorful and smashing look. We have the bowl print or the bow up on top that's tied, which you start to see quite commonly. This is a very cool play on a motif that becomes extremely popular. It's very cool. And do we have anything additional here? No, bequest of Henry Schwab again, so another gift to the Institute. And here we start to get, and we place this as Kangxi period, so end of the 17th century. I guess I could have ordered these a little bit better, but so it goes. This shape tends to become very popular again in later times, but we have a really great scene here. That's what drew me to this initially. Some great polychrome work here. You notice we've got a basic color scheme of the era with the sort of orangish red. We've got the good green. We've got a little bit of black brown throughout the piece, a little bit of this old yellow. So a lot of the colors that were available in the day. And actually, this vase reminds me of one of the first pieces of Chinese porcelain that I bought probably almost 15, 16 years ago now, that I rather liked. And the piece that I bought, I think, was a Republic era imitation of one of these great older pieces, but this is really quite a nice piece, and some interesting things about it. You know, we've got the little cloud border motif. We've still got the medallions here, which come back into style after a little bit of time being less in style, and we've got just some really great motion and action captured in all of these characters, which is a little bit different if you ask me. Here, it looks like we're playing a game of some sort, or we're talking to each other. I'm not sure what the scene is down here. This fella seems to be truly inspired by the leaf that he's just acquired. And we've got this, I'm not sure, it looks like we're unfolding a painting, or we're discussing a painting. We have here a woman using their fan, and here someone is longfully staring off at something. It might be something over here that we're just not seeing, but a really, really nice courtyard scene on this, and I'd love to see more. It looks like we've got maybe a mountain window, or potentially just another scene in a medallion over here, but quite lovely, quite lovely. Really nice. Let's see what we've got for Gift of Edward Bennett. So we don't mark much more. We have marked it to the Kangxi period. Ah, yes. Ah, yes. Here we have a Ming Dynasty ewer. So again, going back in time. The interesting thing here is, the way in which the style ultimately becomes cyclical. Of course, I wouldn't call this, I wouldn't really call this Famille Rose, but you do get some of the precursor of, what really comes back in style in the 18th century. And I wonder if this would be made for, do we have a market designation for this? Was this made for China? Japanese lid. Oh, so we've got a Japanese lid on top. Oh, the lid does look a little bit different. We don't mark this to a specific market. I would wonder if this is for the Middle Eastern market. The color scheme certainly makes me think of that. Ultimately, a very nice thing, and it does look. I would think this might have been even a later lid made to match this piece. Because it doesn't quite look right. Of course, I mean, if it's made in Japan, it's going to be different. And we do have this sort of Ido stylization for the Japanese border, but it might even be a little early for that. This might just be the proto whatever decoration I am thinking of for the borders. But overall, a lovely piece, and Really like to see the base for this. I would think this base is a little bit thicker and not as deep as the Qianlong ones we were looking at. But very, very cool to see a great Ming piece like this. So again, we've got more Ming porcelain. So we're going back in time, and as we go back in time, Shulao's head gets less pronounced. Again, he's got his scepter. This is, what is this, marked as Wusai? Or not marked Wusai. Alright, so we've got polychrome enamel styling here. So we've got a couple different colors that were used. And you can certainly start to see the difference in the figures. We've got a much more pronounced effort at bringing out the eyes than you might see in Qianlong porcelain, and that's certainly worth noting. Other than that, it's a little bit more crude than what might get done. And crude is the wrong word for it. Naive? Is naive the right word? I'm not sure. But this sort of, it's missing sort of a finessed quality that some of the later pieces have. It's a little busier as well. But I'd love to see more of this. You can certainly compare this tree to the work that was done on the other tree, and it might just be that this decorator is less skilled than some of the other ones we were looking at, but still a lovely bowl that I wouldn't turn my nose up if I found it anywhere. Now we skip ahead. We skip ahead a little bit more, and we've got Yangzheng reign mark and period. That is going to place us in the early 18th century, so we've left the Ming Dynasty, and again we're getting things that are strong precursors of things to come in more abundance. So it's kind of cool that they have this earlier version. My first thoughts would have placed this a little bit later, because of the flower balls, which tend to be really popular in the 19th century, and especially moving towards the later part of the 19th century. But as I get in closer, I can tell, these do not look like 19th century flower balls, and the way that they're painted actually feels a little bit different. It's sort of this really raised, textured painted flower ball is not quite what I would expect, and I guess I shouldn't say it like that. It's hard to describe sometimes when you see characteristics on porcelain, and you just feel like but it's sometimes very difficult to describe because, like I was saying, these don't quite look like 19th century flower balls, which look very different. And this especially is interesting. This little sort of almost like a piece holding them together on the edges. Quite a nice piece. Great to see the base here. Again, looking about right for the 18th century. We've got a deeper foot rim. We've got a double mark square 6-character mark, which if I saw that in person, I would be pretty excited. Of course, my Chinese is very basic, so I do not actively read the marks, but I would go ahead and look this one up ultimately, and be very happy with the square mark. In my experience, square marks are good things. I don't know. I've been pretty happy when I found square marked pieces. So we've got kind of just a basic description here, but we talk about the floral medallions and the way in which they were outlined and then fired. So if you want to learn more about that, you can of course come look at this piece at the Chicago Institute of Arts, or the Art Institute of Chicago, I should say it right for their sake. Here, so we skip forward. We've looked at a lot of Ming, we've looked at a lot of Qianlong, and now we're going to look a lot more at some 19th century pieces. At least I hope. I've got a couple more 19th century pieces coming up. This one is a little bit different than most 19th century pieces. The color scheme would make me think it might be early 19th century. And really, kind of pulling from some of these 18th century styles, but, going in what feels like almost new directions. We've got a very normalized border that we were noticing from the other Qianlong vase that we were looking at, and then it looks like we've got patterning all through the inside, and we've got the same border at the bottom. And then we've got this very common 19th century sort of patterning. And I don't know what to call this patterning. I know I've seen it quite frequently, but it's sort of this geometric patterning that becomes really common. And here we've got a pilgrimage scene where we have a person leading, looks like potentially a sage, leading a horse over into the mountain. Possibly it might be a monastery, or it might just be their home. But we're getting these sort of mountain scenes are really starting to become more pronounced. The ideas of the idyllic Chinese monastery, an idyllic countryside. Here we have, it looks like a fisherman working away on the water. Really nicely done. And you still see stuff painted in these patterns to today. And here you can even compare this tree with some of the tree that I was looking at from the Ming piece to understand a little bit of what I was saying about our depictions of the natural world do seem to get a little bit less naive more commonly through these pieces. And, yes, really lovely piece, really lovely piece. We're still here at the end of the Qianlong. So yes, 1736 to 1795. I would think this is near the end of the 18th century. Very lovely yellow ground famille rose. Not as over decorated as some of the 19th century type pieces might be, or if you were to go pull a yellow ground style from the Republic period or the early People's Republic period, they would seem so much busier than this, where things are very evenly spaced, very nicely arranged, really well painted here. Kind of cool to get so close in. And again, you can see once we get really close in, we have almost this texturized pattern that we're seeing here. It's a better vision of it here that we're seeing on some of the other pieces, and we have that gold topped rim. Interesting to see this sort of 3 dots. That's not something that I've come across before. So if somebody knows a little bit more about that, are they jewels? I don't know. It would be good to know. Really great coloration here, and somebody has done just some excellent job at shading these colors to give just a really pronounced sense of the definition of each of these objects. This is a spectacular vase, and again, as I was saying earlier, you can tell the sort of golden era of porcelain just by these wonderful shapes that you get, and this is no exception, although it looks like it might have been imaged crooked. Because you do see a little bit of imperfection between left and right here. But overall, a lovely, lovely piece. Here's something we start to get a little bit more common. This again, we have a yellow ground Qianlong period gifted by Henry Schwab. So this is something that is very popular these days. Of course, it was very popular then. The idea of dragons being super important to both the depiction of China at home, but also sort of a depiction of power and status outside of China. If you were to have Chinese items with dragons on it, it would certainly make a statement in your home. And here, important to note, we have the 5-claw version of the dragon, which has its own significance as well. I always like these dragons that look a little less cartoonish. This one looks, you can start to say it looks a little cartoonish, but if you've seen some of the 20th, 21st century depictions of dragon, they really kind of go overboard. And great to get the antlers here. I love a good dragon with horns or antlers. Really great shaping done all the way through. Good shading on the figure to get sort of pronounced feeling of depth, etc. This base looks like what we would expect it to. Probably, like I said, a thinner foot rim, a thinner, deeper foot rim, like some of the other Qianlong items we've been looking at. And that leads us to our last item, which I saved this for last because, We were talking earlier about the transition from 18th century, early 18th century to middle late 18th century, and then the transition back to some of the stylizations of the early 18th century and stylizations of the Ming Dynasty as Qianlong gives way to Daogong and more Qing emperors after that. The difference here, I would place this probably to the middle late 19th century, and I put this one last because I really was talking about these ideas of artistic cycles. And of course, all of these things bleed through their different periods, and there's no hard stop between any of them. All of these styles are still being produced. They're just being bought more or less, and they're more or less in favor with the elites, both in China and in the West and the Eastern export market. But again, after we get, the popularization of the more busy styles, there also eventually becomes a return to the popularity of these very minimal styles, and things like monochromes, monochrome glass, monochrome fired pieces become very popular once again. And here, it's we're talking a lot about golden ages of Chinese porcelain, and it's kind of interesting to think about because the more that you think about it is, when is China not in a golden age of porcelain? If we're going back in history, there's truly wonderful, extravagant pieces. Of course, there's a couple periods of time where people could adequately point to there not being a golden age, but on the longer span, it seems that each era produces some fantastic pieces, and the mid to late 19th century monochromes are no exception. We've got this wonderful shape here that once you've taken away the decorations, the shape and the form of the vase really become extremely important. So this is a piece that I can see, featuring prominently in a late 19th century estate, possibly, being a centerpiece, having a floral decoration coming out of the top. It's really, really lovely piece here. And I would be thrilled to find this one. This base, I would expect it to be a little bit different. Unlike the other foot rims that we were looking at, I'd actually expect this one to be a little bit thicker, and it might even have a little bit of a sort of trapezoidal shape. Is that the right word? What I mean is that it might seem like the base comes out, and I think you can kind of see that here. We get a little bit of it might not be a pure flat, but of course it could be. It could be, and it might just be a visual trick here that I am being played. But if I were to see it like that in person, I wouldn't be too shocked or worried about its authenticity. Overall, just a wonderful, wonderful shape. So let's see. We've got a big wide open date, porcelain with royal blue glaze. And looks like it was acquired from the Ryerson collection, which we could actually look up and might be interesting. Kind of curious to wonder if these reference numbers indicate the date that things were acquired by the museum, which 1937, if that is the date, that would be right on, like I was saying, for these great households to be starting to donate some of the items as they dissolve or downsize from their 19th century splendor. So, well, that was a lot of different things that we went over and a lot of wonderful pieces of Chinese porcelain. A huge thank you to the Art Institute Chicago for making all of these things publicly available, have sort of public domain designation assigned to all of these items so that they can be viewed and enjoyed by people, but also utilized in academic research. If any of you, or for whatever reason, would like to write articles or do anything on any of the pieces I've looked at, you're freely open to do that because of this push, this public domain push that a lot of museums have been doing in the last really like 5 or 6 years, which is just fantastic, and we really encourage people to do that. We also encourage people to support these institutions. Go visit them in person. Of course, a lot of these items are off view, which is what makes it a little fun to go through them. But there's still fantastic pieces on view at the Art Institute of Chicago. And if you're nearby, we'd highly encourage a visit, not just for the Chinese porcelain. There's actually a lot of really interesting exhibits there. So we thank you for stopping by. If you really enjoy the channel, you enjoy taking a look at these Chinese porcelain items, we really appreciate it if you subscribe, if you comment, all of these sorts of things, liking the video. It all tells YouTube that we're doing a good job, and that's one thing that they really like to see, and that means so they show it to other people. So if you could help us out in that way, we'd really appreciate it. But until next time, thanks for dropping by, folks.